Welcome to our, recording in progress, very good. Welcome to our third solidarity session. I'm very happy to see so many of you here. And I'm particularly happy to welcome our today's presenters, discussant speakers, Anna Gomboeva and Saltanat Shoshanova. I will just very quickly introduce them so that they can get on with their presentations. So Anna Gomboeva is currently doing her PhD at the University of Vienna. She is Saka and Buryat from Novosibirsk, and she studies the construction of race and nationality in Soviet literature written by indigenous Siberian writers. Anna is also a very prolific writer, blogger on Instagram, and posts very interesting material and discussions there on decolonial approaches, discussions with a focus on Siberia. And I really encourage you to look into the Instagram if you read Russian, that is. And Anna said she would post her Instagram name in the chat. So Anna, if you want to do that, that would be really great. All right, our second speaker for today is Saltanat Shoshanova. Saltanat is a queer feminist activist from Kazakhstan and also a queer feminist scholar. And she has done her master's degree in art history from at the Free University Berlin, Freie Universität Berlin. And Saltanat has co-edited a book with me on queer feminist solidarity between the East and West. And I also uploaded the book on the webpage, so the students are very welcome to download that book. Saltanat also will give me some other articles that she wrote on queer feminist art in contemporary Kazakhstan, and I will also put them online so you can afterwards read about her work. All right, so today Anna and Saltanat will talk about the impossible solidarity from a decolonial perspective from post-Soviet Asia, and I'm very much looking forward to your discussion. All right, Anna, if you want to, you can go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you again for inviting me. And yeah, so my name is Anna. I am a graduate student at the University of Virginia, and I will talk today about how do I share screen? Oh, there it is. Do you see my screen? Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Today I will talk about the childhood as a colonial metaphor and infantilization of indigenous voices in Soviet culture. And I will begin by not introducing you, but reminding you of a very popular cultural phenomena from the Soviet times called Chukcha jokes or anecdote про Chukchu. And then from there, I will move to discussing the concept behind it and how it was, I think it originated in Russia, and the other implications for indigenous voices in Soviet culture. Anyway, so Chukchi jokes, anecdote про Chukchu, or short situational jokes, were a form of popular folklore in the USSR. Often they were spread around by word of mouth, and they expressed political and social commentary in a very short, sarcastic, and memorable way. It was kind of like a Twitter of before Twitter. Many popular anecdote or jokes that appeared in late Soviet and post-Soviet times were based on ethnic stereotypes. And one of those ethnic stereotypes was the Chukcha type. So the Chukcha jokes depict a nomadic northern Siberian person represented by a nameless figure of a Chukchi person. And they represent this Chukchi person as someone who's silly, uneducated, seems to be out of touch with surroundings due to lack of education and due to complete unawareness of modern technology. And a lot of Chukchi jokes, as you can see in these examples, are premised upon this Chukchi not being able to understand how modern technology, like for example, trains work. So in one of those jokes from approximately 1984, the Chukchi rides a train card and goes to the restaurant car, but then can't find his own car in the train. And someone asks, "Don't you remember your car?" And Chukchi assumes that there was a birch grove outside the window when he left the car. That's why, like, he can't find it, because like the joke is basically that, you know, the Chukchi doesn't understand how trains work. And some of these, so there's thousands. It was one of the most popular recurring recurring character, and they played on ethnic stereotypes about the childishness, the alleged infancy, the inability for Chukchi to learn Russian language and European ways of living. It was also based on the stereotype that Chukchi people, or just generalized indigenous Siberians, have poor hygiene, that they are sexually promiscuous, or engage in sexual activities that are unusual to Russians. I didn't include those, most of these jokes, because I included some of the least embarrassing and racist jokes, but most of them were like very, like, I wasn't comfortable including most of them, but a lot of you who especially are maybe a little bit older or who have older parents would probably remember that. The universal characteristic trait of Chukchi type from the jokes, again, is childishness, laughable but adorable innocence and naivety. The Chukchi type may appear wise in his innocence and childishness because he thinks out of the box, but he's adorable and funny, and because he's kind of like a child. Anyway, let's continue. I think that the origin of Chukchi jokes originates actually in Russian literature and the work of the editor work of Samuil Marshak. Samuil Marshak was a famous children's writer and political activist. In 1934, during the first Congress of the Soviet Writers, he opened a section on national minority literatures of the USSR with a lecture on the state of children's literature. Marshak called for the creation of children's language that would appeal to children's worldview. And Nikolai Spiridonov was a Yukagir economist an indigenous person from Yakutia. He was an ethnographer, writer, and he graduated from Leningrad University with a PhD in economics. He was introduced to Marshak around 1933-34. And Marshak basically urged Tekiadulok to write a captivating but educational children's novel about the lives of the people of Arctic tundra. Tekiadulok spoke perfect Russian, but was never trained to write fiction, let alone English books. After all, he was an academic. So according to Lydia Chukovskaya, who was a Russian writer and a friend of Marshak, at first, the history of creation of this novel. At first, Tekiadulok wrote this novel by himself, about like Chukchi people in the pre-revolutionary Russia. But when Tekiadulok showed the first draft to Samuil Marshak, Marshak rejected it because the language was too dry. Marshak wanted Tekiadulok to write in a language that would evoke a presence of a nomadic hunter nearby who has a primitive, quote, worldview reflected in the very structure of his talk. So Marshak suggested that Adulok tells him the story of orally and sat down himself to record it in writing. So together, Tekiadulok and Marshak created the novel Жизнь Inturgina Starsheva, or The Life of Inturgin Senior, about the hardships of one Chukchi family they experienced before the revolution. It was meant to be a part of a trilogy that talked about the plight, the troubles that Chukchi people went through, and how basically like the Russian Revolution saved them from everything. Anyway, so the norms of written, so this is the example of from other passages from the novel. And the problem is the norms of written Russian language greatly differ from the norms of oral Russian language. Although not all written norms are always formally recognized, they are visually identifiable by native speakers of Russian and can easily give away a non-native speaker. Although formally the grammar here in this passage is correct, the syntax gives away what Lydia Chukovskaya calls a text that doesn't sound Russian, quote. The skipped pronouns, for example, in the beginning of key sentences, make these sentences look too colloquial and out of place when speaker. The narrator puts objects before predicates and verbs in the end of sentences. It gives a text a sense of repetitiveness, which typically in Russian language is associated with the language of fairy tales, and specifically children's language. So basically what happens here in this passage and the next one is that the native Russian speaker, Samuil Marshak, invented this type of peculiar language for the Yukadir academic Tekyodolog, because the Yukadir didn't know how to sound like a nomad hunter in tundra. So Marshak basically wanted the type of language that Marshak thought that nomad people talk, but also like in Russian. So you can see what's happening here. It's like the presenting like this unfamiliar culture in this like very in the way Marshak thinks what he wants it to present. At the Writers' Conference in 1934, when Marshak proposed the creation of children's language, he emphasized that it is not a simplified adult language, but it must align with children's own worldviews and sense of being. It's not a coincidence that Marshak gave the lecture on children's language when opening the section on national minority literatures. With this lecture, he tied the needs of children's literary language to Soviet expectations from national minority writers at the time. So these national minority writers, like Tekyodolog, they were meant to write for children, like children. It's in the context. So here in this passage, traditional Chukchi cosmologies about what's it called, Northern Lights, align perfectly with the needs of children's language. This text is hardly educational as an ethnographic text because it decontextualizes depictions of Chukchi cosmology and Chukchi worldview to make them sound entertaining to a Russian child audience because these depictions sound entertaining and they sound like fantasies and like fairy tales. So you can see, so instead of like, so Marshak presents this as an educational text, but it's also an entertaining text, and the cosmology, the worldview of Chukchi people is absolutely decontextualized here, and it's presented like, oh, this person is just like weird and he sees strange fantasies, and it's entertaining for kids. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about the infantilization. Infantilization is a form of mental abuse when someone who is physically an adult is treated as if they're physically a young child. So the word child in many European cultures is often used metaphorically to denigrate and ridicule people who do not fit the presumed standards of rational, developed, productive, or educated adulthood. So as a metaphor, the words child and infant have been tied to the idea of linear development of societies and are often used still to invalidate experiences and political agencies of colonized, racialized, and psychiatrist people. So in that sense, infantilization is a colonizing practice, the practice of cultural subjugation and invalidation and reduction of intellectual capabilities and political agencies of colonized peoples. And in this little cartoon from, I don't know, 19th century, you can see like that played out. Anyways, so a little bit about the idea of progress and the linear development. So the Enlightenment thinkers thought that basically human society has stages of development, that they go through the process of progress, sort of a passage from barbarism to civilization through education. And they believe that oftentimes believe that human societies go through the infancy stages, when they're like hunter-gatherers and have no writing systems, to adolescent stages when they have some writing systems and agricultural economy, and then finally they end up in adulthood and in civilized society where they reach industrial economy and the nation state. So later thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Nietzsche, didn't quite agree with Kant and Voltaire on the fact that progress leads toward the betterment of human condition. And Rousseau famously said, for example, that the man in his primitive state, when placed by nature at an equal distance from the stupidity of brutes and the fatal enlightenment of civil men, is gentle and honorable. And Nietzsche also said that progress does not automatically result in the betterment of human condition, that progress might corrupt and make it worse. So this idea that Rousseau pushed, that basically a primitive man must be uncorrupted by the bad things about progress, the primitive man somehow may be morally better than the civilized man, gave rise to later to the literary trope of the noble savage. It's a romantic literary trope. It describes an idealized indigenous person who lives free in the nature, wild and barbaric, but honorable, dignified, and brave because it's uncorrupted by civilization. So this trope is racist and essentialist because it places indigenous people into this box that they must be primitive, that they must be uncivilized, and that kind of defines them, their incivility and their inability to educate, but also their like superior moral stature. And the trope of the noble savage was also present in Russian literature in the novel by Lev Tolstoy, Haji Murad, and also less famously, the Sakha figure of Manchari. You can Google about him. If you Google Manchari on Wikipedia, on Russian Wikipedia, you'll find that the Wikipedia entrance on Manchari basically describes him as the noble savage of the Sakha history. He was a protester from the 19th century. He was like, he's described as a Robin Hood of like Yakutia. A romanticized way to describe primitive gift economies also sipped into political studies, political history, political philosophy. Friedrich Engels, in his essays, described major states of human development, and he calls hunter-gatherer societies primitive communist and egalitarian because these societies shared all resources, and so therefore they were morally better than like capitalist societies. So this also very romanticized and generalized way of thinking about some general primitive societies. They don't even mention who exactly, they just say primitive societies. And Lenin did that too, again, he described also that if you talk about primitive civilization, you will see that they were shared the resources, that they were like more egalitarian, they had no state, and they were like more, they go better, they were like primitive but communist. Anyway. So the noble savage trope is often used by Europeans as a moral reproach of the shortcomings of European progress. The struggles of indigenous peoples are instrumentalized to push political narratives that are only meant to serve European political interests. Russian Siberian thinker and activist Nikolai Yadrintsev popularized a narrative that indigenous peoples of Siberia are dying out at alarming rates, and that Russian people need to save them by educating them. In his 1882 book, Siberia as a Colony, Yadrintsev argued that native Siberians were going extinct all over the continent, and that it was the Russian government's fault. Yadrintsev instrumentalized indigenous peoples and their struggles to build an argument for his own very Russocentric political agenda in Siberia. However, the data that Yadrintsev provided was unreliable because to back his claims, he used information from Russian travelogues and hearsay. Ethnographers such as Serafim Patkanov and Ivan Mainov questioned Yadrintsev's methods and argued that his claims were quite questionable. So Bolshevik academic and political institutions adopted all these essentialist and racist concepts about the vulnerability of and the primitiveness of indigenous peoples. So neither Bolshevik politicians nor academics considered primitive people cultured enough to manage themselves in their own administrative systems. The civil war in Siberia in the north was extremely violent and took longer than in European Russia. During the Civil War, Bolshevik ethnographers tried to help indigenous populations in the North establish indigenous administrative systems loosely based on local traditions. However, after 1928, ethnographers were mostly pushed out of making political decisions, and Moscow encouraged establishing regular electable Soviets. But basically, the difference between the pre-1928 and after 1928 was like very different in the terms of they all didn't consider primitive people cultured enough to manage themselves. So here I just give you examples of some quotes from the Soviet ethnographic journal called Sovietsky Sever. It was published from 1929, I think, to 1934. And there, Russian politicians and Bolsheviks and ethnographers who traveled to the north, they just described they reported on their findings and like what how the Cultural Revolution in the north is going. And they basically why they're so valuable is because they discuss attitudes that indigenous people had toward Bolshevik anti-religious and educational campaigns. And a lot of times, the exaggerated claims pushed by Yadrintsev and later Bolsheviks that indigenous Siberians were dying out and were like very vulnerable and were like almost extinct, they kind of are confirmed not to be quite true because, for example, in this example, we can see that someone is reporting that Nyensi people and Astiki people were basically just in solidarity. They came in solidarity together to protest some kind of Bolshevik political meeting because the Bolsheviks didn't want, because the Bolsheviks excluded shamans and I don't know, some elders from the meeting, and that's why they all of the Ostaks, for example, stood up and left because they didn't want their shamans and elders to be excluded. Other examples also show how indigenous people throughout Siberia and the north discussed like their reactions, the critical reactions toward Soviet Russian political endeavors. For example, one of them says, "You're wasting your time in coming here. We don't need any red tents," like political education camps. Our fathers and grandfathers didn't know about any red tents, and they lived better than we live now. We'll manage without them too. Another one says, "I've got kids who are school age, but I won't let them go to school. Only when they shoot me dead, when they will be able to take them." So these were the discussions in the middle of the creation of residential schools. People were protesting residential schools and taking children away from their families. But of course, the authors of this article present these as basically the signs of ignorance and signs of kulaks and wealthy people influence and shamans influencing backward people and like being annoying, basically. Anyway, to conclude, what's much more sinister today is that the infantilization of indigenous voices did not end with ethnographic journals such as Sovietsky Sever. Indigenous people's criticisms for Bolshevik policies were always depicted in Soviet culture with pity. Indigenous people were always treated as stupid and backward, as these examples from popular Soviet culture from later years show. Kvalitet Lives for the Mountains is the 1950 movie based on a book of the same title. But most famously, The Boss of Chukotka was a movie that people still say that this is the movie which kind of pushed the Chukcha trope into the mass popularity. And also there were like very strange pop culture phenomena such as very exotified image of Nanai Soviet pop singer Kala Bildi, who was Nanai but he posed as like this generalized Chukcha person, and his songs were even the songs that he performed were written by Russian producers, and they talked about like Chukcha people being weird. That's what those songs were about. Anyway, so while Samuel Marshak wrote Sekhiadulok's language as means of entertainment and authenticity, later the infantilization of language has become the norm, and Soviet cinema about the North, as well as late Soviet pop culture about the North, demonstrated the same childish appeal and generalization and universalizing of all indigenous peoples into the trope of Chukcha from the joke. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes. If you have some immediate questions to Anna, something that you didn't understand well and want to check in with her quickly, the general discussion will happen in the end. But if you have some questions to clarify things, then you can ask right away. And I will look in the chat. People are just thanking Anna and saying that it was brilliant. All right. I think if you don't have questions right away, I would say we move on to Saltanat. And of course, if some questions come up, you are happy to ask them by the end of the presentations.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, and thank you, Anna. I will try to we designed our presentation so that I'm like a bit taking from where Anna's left theoretically, but then we move geographically to Central Asia. 1 second. Okay, do you see my presentation? Yeah, but I need to do this, I think. Yeah, so I will talk about Kazakhstan mostly because I come from Kazakhstan. My focus is more sharp when it comes to Kazakhstan, but of course, when I study something about Kazakhstan, it always concerns like the bigger geographical concepts as Central Asia. And for those who don't know, Central Asia is this 5 stan countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. And the map that you see and the borders that you see are actually Soviet creation, and the borders were established after the revolution, as well as some understanding of its borders as of nations. And like people on these territories before, of course, they had distinguished languages and distinguished cultures from each other, but this distinguish was not so much established. And the census before the Soviets came even showed that some tribes on the territory of Kazakhstan, they did not consider themselves to be Kazakhs. They, for example, said that I'm a Muslim, or I'm from this tribe, or I'm from this Rus. Like they had other distinctions, and this idea of dividing this territory into this national state is like modern Soviet idea. And if we, for some reason, okay, yes. And in Kazakhstan, the tribes that were on this territory, they were nomadic, and actually the word Kazakh comes from the word someone who wanders, so a nomad, and they lived in yurts. They were mostly feed themselves from meat and moved according to the animals and like natural cycles. And this idea of the noble savage that Anna was talking about was pretty much present even before the Soviet times, since Catherine the Great even like this idea of that this nomad savage, noble savage needs to be cultivated was pretty much present. And there is this quote from one of the ethnographers who came to this territory during the Catherine the Great's rule, Alexei Levshin, who was mocking Rousseau and his idea of a noble savage. And he said, like, if Rousseau would come to Kazakhstan and live among these people, he would not survive a day. Because of course they do not consist of cannibals, but they're still like very brutal. They always like their way of thinking of what does it mean to be brave. It's cruelty, and they unfamiliar of like morals and nature, and that we are here like to show them how to be. Yeah, someone says that the Tatars also named themselves Muslims. So this idea of the nation came with the Soviet time, and this idea of cultivating the savage and bringing the modernization to this territory was pretty much there since the late 19th century. And when the Soviet power came, it was brutally executed, and it had a very bad consequences for the people who lived on this territory. And maybe for some reason it doesn't click when I click, or it's a bit, I'm sorry. It's very slow when I click. Which, okay, I now learned. I'm sorry. I'm like, Anna already made a joke today. I'm like an old lady who doesn't know the technology. Yeah, the savage. Sorry. Yeah, so it had a very like palpable consequences for the people who lived on this territory. Many of you know about Holodomor, maybe. It's like this Ukrainian famine of the 1930s. And actually not a lot of people know that in Kazakhstan, it was also it was also very present, and it has this Kazakh name, Asharshaluk, and it is now becoming more present in the contemporary artistic and historical and other discourses. And on the territory of Kazakhstan, possibly that 1.5 million people died, and 38% of those people were Kazakhs. And it is the highest percentage of ethnic group that was killed during this Soviet famine. And it happened precisely because of this racial difference, or because of this, the idea that we need to civilize and stop nomadic way of living. So this forced sedentarization, it's called, when the nomads were forced to stop, and it led to a massive animal death, and of course a lot of people died, and not so many Europeans who were settled, who were moved to Kazakhstan, were like died in the same amount. And some historians also agree to call this famine in Kazakhstan a cultural genocide, because through this politics, of course, like language was lost, and families were like broken, and decolonization was happening as well, as Anna mentioned. And of course, artists, contemporary, like since I'm an art historian and I look at how art reflects on those things, contemporary artists try to like reflect, and this is artwork by Saulia Suleimanova, who depicts people fleeing from hunger in the Soviet Kazakhstan. And I really love this series. She makes this beautiful paintings or artworks out of plastic bags. And those are made from plastic bags that come from like food wrappers. And if you're from Kazakhstan, you would recognize like famous Rahat, how you call it, like fabric, not fabric, who produces like famous Kazakh chocolate. And of course, since this territory didn't have like written culture, a lot of was lost. So we don't have like primary sources about the hunger. We have some pictures that were made during this time, like this one, and she replicates it. So this like idea of going back, it's the idea to come back to this like lost history through replicating the photographs and listening to the stories of grandchildren or children of survivors is very important. And when we come to the idea of like criticizing the colonial structures, this is happening as well a lot, and in documentaries, Saulia Suleimanova as well was like saying that we need to call this famine a genocide. And there are artists who use a very like brutal, in your face kind of approach to this topic. And for example, in this artwork, I forgot the name of the artist. I forgot. I will tell you. I forgot to put the name. He depicts here, for example, like a Soviet government as a cousin of Nazi Germany, and depicts people who died from hunger as like on the same level as people who died in concentration camps. So we see this like way of trying to criticize the Soviet past and come back to whatever roots that we have. And of course, as a queer feminist, I'm interested in how like women's question was executed in this during this time on this territory. And there was this hujum, like a period that it's called hujum era in Uzbekistan, when the whale burning was happening, and Soviets were planning to execute it in 6 months, and it lasted for 30 years because, well, it's not so easy to come and like change the way people live. And the women, of course, were like put in this double struggle again. So at one side they had Soviets who told them, yeah, burn the whale, like emancipate yourself, you don't need to be under this you know, this like saving the brown woman from the brown man kind of trope. But at the same time, when those women came back home and wailed, their men were killing them because they dishonored them. So a lot of women died during this time. A lot of women were like forced to poverty, and of course the structures that were established did not support them. And contemporary artists also react to this history, and this very beautiful installation by Saudat Ismailova called Chiltan. And Chiltan, this is pieces of fabric made of like partially made of horse hair and cotton. And yeah, it tells the story of I think 50 chiltans, and each chiltan represents either a member of her family in the past or fictional female characters from Uzbek tradition, or women who she knows were like active during this period. when we talk about like queer feminist struggles now in contemporary Kazakhstan, we have since a couple of years we have women's marches, and they like partially approved by the government, and this is like gives us hope, and it shows that it works when the NGOs and activists from the ground so we come into solidarity together. And of course, this is like connected to the past and to the struggles that we had in during Hujrum era. So yeah, when it comes to like contemporary art in Kazakhstan and how we think about it in terms of in decolonial terms, like what do we consider to be a decolonial act in artistic way? Like, is it talking about the past? Is it talking about like a Soviet time and this owning the Soviet symbols? Is it like this strange mixture of English language coming to the yurts kind of thing? Like what is it? How can we like how can we critically dissect these topics when we look at contemporary art coming from post-Soviet Central Asian space? And sorry, when we come to talk about theory, the one source that we have is Madina Tlastanova, who wrote on decolonial thought in connection to art in Central Asia. So she theorizes it in this way. She says that there is an imperial difference between how we should see Russia as a colonial force in connection to other imperials, which she calls the First League, which is like US, like Western European countries, and then Russia is like in this double role here, and she calls Russia Janus-faced empire, which is with one face looks at First League colonies and tries to be like them. And also Russia is an external imperial other to those colonies, but at the same time the other face of the Janus-faced empire looks at its colonies as like Central Asia or Siberia, and Russia uses different kinds of tools to still impose its power after the post-Soviet, after the Soviet regime fell. So it says like the false narrative of Russia as a savior of suffering nations, and we see this now pretty much executed in Ukraine. It says that Russia is not Europe, and this neo-Eurasianism, if you know about this, it's like basically this theory that Russia needs to be like all the post-Soviet space needs to come back to Russia and become this Eurasian not empire. Tlastanova says that art here is seen as an effective decolonial force, and art should do this through affect, through emotion, through problematization of rationality, and coming to collective rather than individual, through bodily experience, and most importantly through this epistemological disobedience. But we have critique of this approach by Mahira Soyerkulova, who is a scholar from Kyrgyzstan and like a assistant professor at Central Asian University, and recently she wrote like a critique on Tlastanova's theory, and she says, okay, we have this epistemological disobedience that Tlastanova describes as a way to oppose this dark side of modernity, aka coloniality. But how can we interpret this disobedience? Like, for example, if we take Turkmenbashi, who you see on this picture, who is a ruler of Turkmenistan, and in early 2000s, he disobeyed this Western cultures, and he said, okay, I ban ballet, I ban circus, I ban theater, only we will left with our Turkmen culture. And Soerkulova also like gives other examples of this epistemological disobedience that would suit the logic that Tlastanova suggests. And she says, like, yes, this disobedience can be appropriated by neoliberal and far-right forces. And anytime someone comes to critique it and starts talk about social justice, they marked as colonialists or like mankurtist. If you know this word, I can like, I wouldn't, it would take too much time to, but for those who know, you understand me. And so basically every time we speak from like anti-capitalist stance or the stance that critiques class, this epistemological disobedience suggested by Tlastanova crumbles a little bit. So for Soerkulova, we can not lose anti-colonial and anti-capitalist stance when we do the decoloniality. And this is a quote from her where she says that the decoloniality of being, knowledge, and feeling cannot be achieved by mere effort of the will. Our capacity to think, write, to feel, and to create art is rooted in the material conditions of our existence. And she critiques Tlastanova as well for not for the lack of sorry, 1 second. For the lack of like self-reflectiveness and not positioning her within the like global structures of knowledge and of like this color blindness approach. So I would agree with Soerkulova, as you maybe felt already, that for me the decolonial struggle should be anti-capitalist, it should include the class critique, and I would mark this as queer feminist for me. And I would like to show you, I have 5 minutes or something, this artwork by a queer feminist artist from Kazakhstan called Decolonization of Kurt. Artist's name is Medina Bazargali, and they use pronouns they. So they created this artwork in 2018. I won't show you the video, it's a bit long, it's 10 minutes, but Kati will send you the link. I will share it. But I have like screenshots from it. So this is like Medina takes kurt, which is traditional snack from Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. I'm not sure about other stands, but I think they also might have something like this. It's this like sour milk snack, which almost always in the shape of a ball, and you just eat it, and it's very good for your, I don't know, for everything, because it's like a superfood. And it was this magic food that could last long, and you could just put it under your cheek and just run all day. That's what I did throughout my whole childhood, basically. So in the first stage, Medina takes this pure kurt, which symbolizes Kazakhstan, and then on the background you hear this like automatic voice who reads out loud this постановление, like a law of a, not a law, like a report of establishing the Kazakh SSR. And while this is happening, Kurt is being colonized by other foods or something. And then after a couple of, after the time passes, we see that Kurt is decolonized by the mold, and the mold is being this colonial powers. And the stage 4 is to decolonize the Kurt and to get rid of this mold, which is happening like this. And then the artist realizes that the mold is too deep inside the Kurt and it's not possible, and tries to burn it all down, and then the decolonization is failing, and it's like fatal error. It's very, very well made, and it's like has this matrix kind of aesthetics to it. Please watch. And here's Medina on the left with a sign during the protest against war, where they wrote that like "Нет колониальному насилию," and like putting this like decolonial kind of agenda in connection to the war. And there are several artists who took part in the exhibition, which was like aimed to support the Ukraine. And this is one of the artworks where you can see this like Kazakh mountains and the colors of the Ukrainian flag and Kazakh words saying no to the war. So with this, I will stop, and I see that we have some comments in the chat. I will try to read it. Oh yeah, in Uzbekistan they also have Kurd. Yes, yes.
All right, thank you very much for this presentation, Saltanat. I would take a second to ask if anybody has immediate questions for clarification, or any quick comments. As I understood you before, Saltanat and Anna, you have questions to each other that you would want to start the discussion going. Let's see what's in the chat. Okay, just quick comments of appreciation. Thank you very much. So I think if there are not immediate questions, I would ask you to start your discussion going, and everybody can think of their questions, and then we hopefully get into the flow.
Can I start?
Yes.
Thank you for the comment. Great love and respect to my Turkic sisters.
Yeah, actually, that's what we talked about. No, we talked about like pan-Turkism and like how to think about this post-Soviet Asian solidarity, and at the same time not to reinforce these ideas of pan-Turkism.
Yeah, we want to talk about it a little bit, because we discussed just how diverse Turkic people are. So I am half Buryat, half Sakha, so I'm half Turkic, and I don't know. I just Saltanat and I were just rehearsing the other day, and I told her about the friend of the family. So I grew up in Novosibirsk, and Novosibirsk, in case you are not familiar, Novosibirsk is a city in Western Siberia. And what's important about it is that it's a historically Russian colonial, not colonial, but industrial city. It's historically white Russian, like it's 99% white Russian. And I grew up there in the late 90s to 2000s. And it was an experience to be like the only Asian kid around everywhere. But my family was friends with another family who were ethnically Kazakh. And we were friends through our fathers, because my father, who's Buryat, not Turkic, but still, it will make sense in a minute. My father and their father, Kazakh father, they were like such good friends because they traveled. They were both working in a research facility. They were both veterinarians, and they were both животноводство. What? How to call it? Like meat? Huh?
Animals tree, something tree.
Yeah, animal husbandry.
Yeah.
Yeah, like academic animal husbandry facility, like research facility. And they were both working there, and they were also very good friends because they traveled all over Novosibirsk Oblast to different farms, and they made friends with different farmers to look for, and they were looking for the best red meats in the area, because so they bonded very much over this mutual love for red meat, different types of red meat, beef, but also horse meat and lamb. And they both just like could spend hours discussing how Russian people, like white Russian people, don't understand meat, don't understand red meat. And I just find it fascinating that like, and they could like share a lot of experiences in the city like Novosibirsk, because while they were traveling all over the region to looking for different kinds of red meats, they were also stopped by the police frequently, because it was like the late 90s. It was still Chechen wars, Chechen conflicts going on, and the Russian police had a specific like idea of looking out for people who don't look Slavic, and they would like, always stop my dad and his friend because they were like, two Asian people, and they would like stop them. And sometimes, so my dad and his friend had to carry around passports every time. And one time they forgot their passports and they spent the night in the Izolat, in a police station, because the policemen thought that they were лица кавказской национальности. So it's like a Russian 90. It's like a racialized term in Russia for it translates literally as the face of Caucasian nationality. It makes very little sense in Russian, makes even less sense in English, because it's like a racialized way to talk about people who don't look Slavic to Slavic people. It's like a social construct of like how to basically racialize Chechens and Dagestanis. Here we go. We have this term, faces of Caucasian nationality. So they thought that my dad and his friend, who were Kazakh and Buryat, were like this faces of Caucasian nationality. And they spent a night in the police station for that. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So after like a couple of hours of talking, we came to a conclusion that the way of solidarity is meat. No, I'm kidding, but like the point of solidarity for Turkic or like Asian people might be food, but yeah, we just yeah, we just wanted to maybe start our talk about like where I stopped my presentation, like with this theoretical understanding of decoloniality, and like how would we approach it. And Anna, what would you like say? How would you see this decolonial disobedience, or like epistemological disobedience, and how we could like execute it? differently, or like according to you, what would you add to critique of Suyarkulova? Maybe, I don't know.
And maybe can I add some aspect that I was wondering while you two were presenting? I was wondering like what nationalism plays, like which role do you see for nationalism? Because I feel like a lot of the resistance that could fall into Dolstanova's definition is very nationalistic and not does not provide a lot for internationalism that is critical to, yeah, nation states, for example.
Yeah, we discussed the nationalism aspect too. I don't remember if it came. Anyway, anyway, I think we just came to a conclusion that basically ethnic nationalism is like how a lot of people on Instagram ask me, specifically Buryat people ask me a lot about what's the difference between Buryat nationalism, Buryat ethnic nationalism, and decolonial ideas. And I always struggle to explain it because I don't quite understand the difference, I think, very well. But I try to say that unlike ethnic nationalism, decolonial ideas are meant to be solidarizing, and is that the word? Like they meant to make people come into solidarity with each other, and decolonization is meant to be international and internationally empathetic, where versus ethnic nationalism is kind of looking only inwards and trying sometimes a lot of ethnic nationalism that I know personally, including some people in my family, they build themselves everything on the idea of victimhood, and they build everything around the idea that Buryat identity is defined by victimhood. And although it is very important to talk about victimhood, it shouldn't be like used to, throw it as a, I don't know, as a some kind of like weapon to take down other groups of people. Because specifically, this is a very controversial thing that I posted lately on Instagram, and a lot of people unfollow me. But I believe that ethnic Russian people have to go through the process of decolonization too, and the only people that can help them in a way, I don't know, am I being like a Buryat savior person? But anyway, I think that the only people that can save them are the domestically colonized people, such as indigenous Siberians, people in the Caucasus, and that is why it is so important not to, I think, define one's identity, like Buryat identity or Sakha identity, around victimhood, because it just inevitably ends up as this universal hatred toward any type of like white Russian experience, which it's problematic. Like I do not deny that Russian settler colonialism was a big deal. I don't deny that white supremacy in Russia, it also has a pretty long history. I don't deny that, but it's just something that shouldn't be treated as like this, I don't know, like thing that should, I don't know, like some kind of like boxing grusha. Can't speak anymore. It shouldn't be treated as something that like can be used to blame for anything ever. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. I mean, like the first thing is what doesn't make this like national state ideology is decolonial at its core. It's this exclusionatory politics. So the moment we start to exclude some people and like do not allow them into the idea of national, it reinforces again the same colonial logic. So so this in this way it cannot like we cannot see them as a truly decolonial force. And with the victimhood, it's very interesting. One moment, I need to find a quote. Victimhood. Like when I was studying this art that deals with the famine, I was reading a lot about how this, it's called victimhood nationalism, this terminus, where this like rhetoric starts to like, to emphasize the victimhood too much, and it comes to an absurdist point where like facts being forged. For example, when we talk about famine, there were a lot of usage of photographs that come from, for example, Chinese famine from the 60s, I think it was in the 60s, to depict Kazakh famine, because there are no pictures basically, but we needed like a visual proof to show how the Kazakh famine could look like. And or like pictures of Vietnam, like hunger in Vietnam or something like this. So it was like forged imagery, and I understand the like the idea behind it, but it becomes again a lie in the end. So yeah, so I think it is also important to come away from this victimhood nationalist thinking, again, from like nationalist thinking in general. And I think I also mentioned, like in our discussions previously, that the idea of creolization should come handy in this as a very good alternative, I would say, to this, like if we don't have like national identity that can bind us together in a struggle against like imperial past, colonial past, we can create this new hybrid identity which would not exclude anyone on a national level. So I don't know, Kati, if this like answers your question about nationality and how we thought about it.
It does, thank you. I see that Hannah has her hand up, but I also wanted to refer to a question in the chat about the usage of white supremacy and if it's not better to use Slavic supremacy instead. And I think that is that opens questions about how you define racism, because you talked about racism in both of your presentations, I think, and sometimes it's difficult to understand if this is the same racism that's, for example, applied in Western Europe and the US towards Black people, or if it has different structures. So maybe you want to spend a second on that, and then I think Hannah had a hand up.
I can add something, and then maybe Anna, you can like add something to what I add. I like when I think, I mean, as you saw, I'm not fully agreeing with Tlastanova, but I agree with your definitions of Russia as this Janus-faced empire. I think it's a very good analogy, and it's very useful. And this is also like, I live in Berlin, in Germany, and this is what also I see, like an experience here, that like people from Eastern Europe here are not quite white. you know, like there is still the difference between white and then like Eastern Europe white. They also like racialized kind of in some context, maybe not from the looks, but as long as they open their mouths and everybody hears like Slavic accent, then they become like the other and this like barbaric other kind of. So I don't know if I have answered to your question. Maybe Anna can add here, like what would you use, Slavic supremacy or so? I mean, we don't need to forget about this double layer of different types of white.
Yeah, no, I think totally the concept of whiteness is kind of hijacked by like mostly American, I think, interpretations in general. That's why it's a little bit difficult to use it and apply it to Russia and Eastern Europe. And Slavic supremacy is definitely a thing. And I think it's a good way to describe certain colonial relations in Siberia in particular. This is the region that I know most about, at least, because just judging from my parents' memories of the life in Sakha Republic in the my mother's memories, she says that there was always like it's like throughout history there were Polish people that were sent away from Poland to Yakutia, and there was a huge, not huge, but pretty visible Polish diaspora in Sahara, in Yakutia, before the revolution and after the revolution. And there were people of other ethnic Eastern Europeans in Yakutia. And it just, I don't know much, and obviously there's not much written about it. I only know about this from what my mom says. But there was like, she just says that there was kind of like a hierarchy of people in Yakutia sometimes that was not super like, obvious, but it was just like some Eastern Europeans at the top, then like Russians, and then like, or maybe sometimes Russians are at the top of the hierarchy, and then other Eastern Europeans are lower the hierarchy. It just changes. And then go Yakuts, Sakha people, and then at the very bottom are the indigenous peoples of like Tungusic or Mongolic groups, Yukadir Savinks. And it's just something that she can't like, obviously she's not even a human, like she doesn't know how to describe it, but I have read about it in some late Soviet Sakha literature by specifically author Safron Danilov, who talked about it. And it's visible from his works that he doesn't know how to name this, but it's just something that was present. And I wish that I could, I don't know, had more time to research more about this.
We had a question from Hannah.
Yeah, I was also going to say.
Okay, thank you. So you just told us about Russian presence in Central Asia, but maybe you can give some comments on Chinese presence in Central Asia and maybe some disputes between China and Russia in Central Asia.
Disputes between Russia and China.
Yes.
I cannot say a lot, I think, about this, but when it comes to like Kazakh way of dealing with, or maybe Nura has something. No, okay. When it comes to like how Kazakhstani state is dealing with these topics, like what Nazarbayev did, and I think maybe it's still the case with the current president, which is called like multivectorная политика, like multi-vector politics, where Kazakhstan tries to be like a pleaser for all of the forces that surrounds it. So we have Russian force, we have China, we have like a Turkic world, which is also like trying to like pull in Kazakhstan into this like pan-Turkic brotherhood. Yeah, I mean, they try to balance, and also of course the West, which is like US, and the presence of Western companies who deal mostly with oil and gas and stuff like this. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah, I mean, Kazakhstan is trying to balance between all of this, and we're actually selling out to all of them. We sold parts of it to West, we sold parts of it to Russia, like we sold our grounds to China. Some of the parts in Kazakhstan are rented to China for like 70 years. Baikonur is rented to Russia for 70 years. So we're like, I think giving up a lot. And thank God, I don't think China is culturally interested in Kazakhstan, kinda. I don't feel this, that they're trying to influence too much on it. But I heard a lot that, of course, a lot of migration is happening, and there are a lot of like mixed marriages happening between Kazakh women and Chinese men, specifically because of like demographic imbalances in China and Kazakhstan. Yeah, but I don't know if I answered your question.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I wanted to add that in Sakha history, in the history of Yakutia, there was the presence of China-phobia. I don't know, is there the word? Like
Chinophobia, it's called.
China-phobia was a very prominent part of Yakut liberal intelligentsia before the revolution. There was this Sakha philosopher and political activist, Alexei Kulakovsky. He even wrote about how Chinese people will come and invade Yakutia, and like Chinese and Japanese people will come and invade Yakutia and kill everyone. And that's why Yakut people need to work together with Russians to like, not as for the purpose of not getting just, it was like kind of racist too, because it's based on because Kulakovsky was educated in St. Petersburg, and he probably got this, I don't know, I can't really say for sure, but from the way that it reads, it sounds like the European notion of yellow scare or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe you mean yellow thread? Yellow
thread, yeah.
Yes.
And it's just so interesting to hear this from a Sakha thinker too. And it just complicates everything so badly, because I would imagine that in St. Petersburg, and I've read about like in the 90s, people discovered Kulakovsky's journals from the times that he was in St. Petersburg. And people claimed that he experienced racism in St. Petersburg, and he had some kind of like letters written about like his experience in St. Petersburg. So I would imagine that in pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg, people didn't treat him as equal in St. Petersburg. I don't think so. So like, how does that work? Like how do you like push the yellow thread agenda and then experience racism in St. Petersburg? Like, how does that work? It just makes everything so complex. It just shows how like everything is just.
I mean, I think it works really perfectly. Do you also have this theory that before Mongols came, people, like, we have this theory that in Kazakhstan people were European looking, and then Chinggis.
Someone told me about that.
Yeah, and then Chinggis Khan came and fucked us up. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know, but yeah, he came, and then we became this like non-European looking. And then you once in a while you see a Kazakh person who has this like red hair and like green eyes, and we mark them as true Kazakhs because they are like this like untouched, pure kind of Kazakhs. And then so of course I think when like choosing between Russia and China, we would of course go with the European looking colonization.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I've definitely heard people say that Yakuti, or like people who lived in Yakutia, were like white and blonde and blue-eyed or something.
yeah.
Thank you. It's really interesting what was happening, like, I mean, historically in the region between Kazakhstan, Uyghur region and Mongolia. Because like Inner Mongolia became the part of China during Qin dynasty. And yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for the questions. There are more questions in the chat, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. And some people already said they have to leave. So I would suggest to thank Anna and Saltanat again for this very interesting and thought-provoking presentation, and ask them to send me some of the links and references that you have talked about, and I will put everything on the webpage for the NYI students. Yeah, and I think
some people asked there in the chat to share more artists. I will share this like article that I wrote. There you have some names there. And also I will share Mahira's article, which is in Russian. I will share Medina's video. I will share my presentation. And if you have any questions, you can write me via email. And thank you very much for this lovely comments, and thank you for inviting me. And Anna, I think we nailed it.
yeah.
Of course, thank you for the discussions that we had previously. And I truly think that...
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora.
Yeah, and I also just got an article that Anna wrote about the question of whiteness, touching upon the question of whiteness, and I will also upload that. It's from the Queer Sibir book that some of you wrote together. All right, so thanks for coming, everybody. And I want to announce that on Tuesday, we have the next Solidarity session, and we will again talk about Central Asia, because Georgi Mamedov will be here, who is at the American University in Bishkek, and he will engage with Tatiana Srko, a researcher from Belarus who works a lot on solidarity between the West and the East. And I think it will be a fascinating continuation of the discussions that we had here. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.